Hello and welcome to another day of Gardentober. Today's prompt is herbal and I've decided to go with hibiscus, thinking more of like the tea, like an herbal tea. So I've been drinking a herbal hibiscus tea this summer, so I thought it'd be kind of fun to include that on here. So this is our first more vague prompt and just a little bit more open-ended. So if you really wanted to do something like a heather or a lavender or a rosemary or something like that, feel free to differ from what I'm doing. This is just what I have chosen to do with this prompt. I had kind of the prompt on the list, and I also had hibiscus, and I felt like the two went together, and I was able to kind of kill two birds with one stone here. So I'm really excited to dive in and paint this hibiscus flower for you today. It is a pink hibiscus, which I will throw on the screen. But if you are interested in more of like a blue toned hibiscus or something a little more purple, I do have a painting that I created a couple of years ago, and you can follow along with that one. All right, to start, we're going to shift this over and mix our colors real quick and just kind of give you a full idea of what we're looking for, what we're going with. Okay, I've just added some quinacridone magenta, some water to that. I mean, that looks pretty close. We need to warm it up a bit, and maybe Winsor yellow would be just right. Another very similar color, if you have Winsor yellow, if you don't have Winsor yellow, is transparent yellow, which tends to be my go-to yellow. But today, for the challenge, I'm going to try and stick with some of the more popular colors. Let's go with ultramarine. All right, and then for our green, I'm kind of thinking, well, let's just kind of stick with what we have. Let's play with ultramarine, and you know, that's the color I was going to go for anyway. So we're just going to play with that. It's pretty heavy on our Winsor yellow. All right, so final colors are Winsor yellow, quinacridone magenta, and ultramarine blue. Let's move on. Okay, I'm going to start with just kind of placing some ground in. I'm grabbing a little bit of our pink tone that we've mixed up, just kind of dabbing things around. So see how watery that is? And then we're going to go in and just do a first pass, an initial wash, just applying some of this color down. Establishing some of the tone. If there's something like you really wanted to have like a nice glow or definitely like a deeper shadow somewhere, this would be a good time to kind of add that in. But I like to just start with something a little bit lighter, go back in with a little more pigment and start to add that in, just to establish kind of where shadows are and the overall structure. And this is, so you see how nicely that blended in. That's because I'm painting wet on wet at the moment. So while the paint is still dry, or still wet, I'm adding more paint to it. Not puddles of paint, but more paint to it in order to get that soft finish. All right, now I'm going to add a little bit of water, grab from our really watery section, dab that off on a paper towel, and I'm just going to move on to the next section. Now it's not soaking wet, I don't have like a puddle on my paper. So it's not sopping wet, but you can see that little bit of a sheen. That is everything that is still wet. So while it's still wet, I'm going in with a little bit more pigment, again, not super soaked, just to allow that to fade in nicely. This one didn't really need it, so it wasn't a great example. And as this one dries, I'm going to move to this one in order to avoid kind of any bleeding. Bleeding being kind of like a transfer of color that is unintentional. I'm going to be very careful around this stamen that I want to keep nice and light and creamy. You know what, I did that with just water and no pigment. So I'm going to add some pigment back in. I need to be careful not to add too much water or I'll get a real big puddle and a bloom. This one looks like it has kind of a shadow on this side as it tucks under this petal. All right, now we're gonna get a little gutsier. I'm gonna take my large flat brush and I'm going to wet everything in this section except my petals. This brush actually might be a little too big. All right, then I'm going to go in with our green, just separating a little bit. That's pretty normal. I'm just going to touch it along the edge and let it kind of bleed out. I think I got it quite wet enough. If your paper is drying real fast like mine is, you might need to take a smaller section. Cleaning my brush off, clean water, dabbing off so I'm not leaving a puddle, which I did anyway. And then again, while that's still wet, picking up some more pigment and going in a little more targeted on my leaf here. This paint really dried on me. All right, adding a little bit more blue in here. Blue or green. So we had kind of our green color mixed. This has a little bit more of our ultramarine blue mixed within it. Cleaning that off, dabbing it. Not an aggressive clean, so it's probably still dirty, but rinsed it. bit more of our blue to our green again. Get a nice deep blue section here. And this is still wet, so it's all blending out nicely. It'll all kind of fade, and you'll get that real painterly effect. Cleaning my brush off. I'm going to take the size 10 this time, clean water, dab it off so I'm not leaving a puddle, and then this is what I'm going to use to go around this next section. It's a smaller section, I don't want to be too aggressive, but I do want it to have a good amount. I want it to be good and wet. Which this water is just eating this, the paper is just eating up this water. A little more than my usual paper. That's okay. Going in with our more yellow tone to create that same base. Just kind of frame everything. Then with our deeper tone, or more blue tone, color or value, however you want to. Back to our more yellow color, I'm going to go in kind of where this leaf is. We'll go in and tighten it up, but I'll just kind of get it established. Slightly bluer tone on this leaf down here. All right, we're going to do the same thing on this section, kind of all up here. This might fall under getting a little too intense too quickly. So I'm going to pull back a little bit. So I just took my brush, I wiped it off, I rinsed it, wiped it off, picked back some of that pigment. Okay, we're just gonna let, especially this section up here, dry. That's still quite wet, and we will move on. All right, without having too much on our brush, we're gonna go in now and do a little bit more of like a dry brushing technique. Wiping it off and pulling it up a little bit more. Wiping it off and blending it, a little bit more pigment, dabbing off. And I'm just pulling. Now some of this is deeper just because it's a little bit wet. So I'm dabbing it off. I have pigment on my brush, but I'm really just working dry to get some of the texture in the petals. Wiping my brush off and using the damp pigment that is left to kind of blend everything out. And repeat. So a little bit of paint, really not very much. Let me show you how much I'm taking. So this is a little puddle I'm working from. I'm literally doing that. That's what I'm taking. And then because there's not a lot there, it's not transferring a lot, and that's how you add a very light glaze. And how we get some of this texture that's in here. I don't normally go for this style of painting, but for some reason it's just been what I wanted to do today, at least with this prompt. I don't know if it's because the veining on this flower is so intense, and I mean, I think it's very pretty. So, or just in the spirit of Gardentober, let's try some new things. Try something you don't normally do. All right, so there's one kind of done. Admittedly, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it, but we're committed to it. We're gonna also do it on this other flower, but I'm gonna go through in, again, very dry brush and kind of add in some of these shadows. Now that kind of some of that texture's been placed on. It will most likely eliminate some of the texture that we've added in here, some of this striping, this variation, but that's okay. If it takes up too much, we can always add it back in. All right, before I fix that side to kind of make everything match, I'm going to work on this stamen real quick, just to show you what goes on, because this is going to be kind of a lot of repetition. So I'm just taking a little bit of the yellow tone that we had, and I'm going to carefully I'm going to add just a little bit You know, I have a little bit of just kind of like some brown, just the tiniest touch, just to kind of mellow it out. It's just really bright. So we ended up with, I don't know if you can see that, but it's just a slightly more mellow yellow. And I'm just gonna go in, I'm gonna start in the shadows. Again with the yellow. Adding a little more yellow. I'm mixing it with kind of that brown that we had, the kind of the creamy color, but now I'm just adding a little bit more yellow to it just to warm it up and deepen it a touch. And we can go in with some shadows later. I just really wanted to get kind of the creaminess there, but also save that highlight. And I'm going to repeat on this side. Almost feel like a yellow ochre toned down with a touch of blue might be the right fit here. Going in with our warmer green, so it has a little bit more of our yellow tone on it, and I'm just going to tidy up some of these leaf sections. Sorry about that. So we're going to go around and carve that out. It'll be a subtle definition, but it should just help define the space. All right, unfortunately I had to empty my memory card. So while that was happening, I just kind of filled in the texture on these two blooms, the bud and the, I guess, partially opened bud, and then this flower right here. And I'm going to go through and just do a little bit of touch up. So you can see here we've got some of these deeper dark areas, and that helps to really ground this flower, where this one looks a little washed out. So I'm going to do exactly what we did with the other one, where we're going back in with some of this color and adding a little pop of a shadow. Cleaning my brush off, wiping it off so I can kind of blend that in a little bit better. See how that's already coming to life a little bit more? One way that you can learn to better be able to understand if your painting is finished, if the contrast is where it needs to be, one of the best things you can do is take a picture of it and turn it black and white. That way you can see, oh, see how like these petals all pretty much read the same, except we've got like these cuts coming out of them. Okay, how can we give that a little bit more definition, a little bit more personality? And you can add some of those kind of mid-tones in here, which immediately start to add a little bit more depth, character, and interest. Now, having done this for years, I don't usually need to do that, but there are definitely times when I'm struggling, and I will use that trick. Sorry, I'm having trouble doing these stripes and talking at the same time, as you've probably noticed throughout this video. But I wanted to just kind of let you know that that's something that you can do, and that's something that I am doing. Really all of your artwork, that you can go in and check the value, see how light and dark everything is, see if it's reading well. Because even right now, I feel like this bud is reading a little bit better because we've got this deeper area here, which I'm going to exaggerate just a touch more. See how that just kind of frames it in nicely? But we are missing that element on this bloom. Now, it's soft, it's kind of off to the side, but we've got this lower petal, which could be in more of a shadow. So let's add a little bit more shadow here with just a little bit of this pigment. Can add a little bit more depth down here by darkening that. And see how already that's starting to come to life a little bit more. We don't need to add a ton. Our goal is to draw the viewer in so they're starting to look for those details. I don't want them to see that bud first. I don't want that to be the interest. They might see this one first because he's kind of out by himself, but because of that stem, you're drawn in and around. Sorry, this is kind of turning into a composition lesson, which was not the intent. If you are interested in composition, I do have a full course on that where we really dive in and we problem solve together. We walk through different elements and principles of design and just rules of composition. But here, I guess I'd give you some little tidbits. I have decided, just like looking at the whole thing, I don't want to add kind of the starburst in here. I like how it's softer. I think we've got enough going on visual interest here with kind of some of the watercolor effects, and I think that the red would detract, at least in a way that I don't prefer. So I've decided not to include it. I am going to take some of our blue-green though, and I'm going to fill in some of these negative space sections. I'll probably add a little bit of our pink as well, in order to desaturate it a little bit so it's not quite as bright as in here. And looking back, that's looking good. It will dry a little bit later. All right, now a closer look. Hopefully that view wasn't too irritating, but I thought it might be helpful if we really zoomed out and you can see what I'm doing when I'm kind of backing up and assessing my artwork. All right, I think that will work. I might need to tone it down just a little bit more by adding a little bit more of our pink color just to kind of set it in the background. Oh, the baby's up. I'm also going to add a little bit more of our blue here. We ended up with kind of a bald spot. So I'm just going to fade this in. Then I think I'm going to have to get the baby. All right, and before he starts to really cry for me thinking I've forgotten about him, let's take a look back. All right, and that is our finished hibiscus drawing for our herbal prompt. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope that it was helpful for you. Some things that I would go back and change if my child wasn't crying. I might add a little bit more depth in here for the stamen, a little bit more of a shadow in here, just because I feel like this flower is reading a little bit better than this one. But overall, I'm very happy with it. I'm very excited with the direction we went. I don't normally do kind of the texture style painting, but it was a fun challenge and I'm glad that we did it. And I think overall it looks very interesting and very fun. So again, I hope that you are having a wonderful, wonderful day, that you are enjoying our Gardentober prompts. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, I will have that linked in the description box. I cannot wait to get started on our next prompt, and I will see you then. Happy drawing.